Okay, today we're going to go over the residential lease agreement. What we're looking at here is a copy of the Georgia lease agreement, but the Florida one is basically the same, just some minor differences that we don't really need to go over for the purposes of the video. But we'll just walk through it step by step so you can see what is on your lease. So it starts out with the date that the lease is written. Then you have the name of the landlord, the name of the tenant, and the property address. You'll see a legal description. This one is blank because this is just a sample agreement, but on the real one it'll have the legal description from the county. And then we get into the important stuff. The term of the agreement will show the dates that the lease is effective. So make sure that the date it starts is correct and the date you expect it to end is correct. We generally do a 1-year lease. If you're starting your lease in the middle of a month, then it'll be just short of a year. It'll always go to the end of a month. So if you're starting in the middle of January, it will end at the end of December. So that's how that works. Says we'll make sure we get possession to you within 3 days of the commencement date. Normally it's actually the commencement date itself, but just in case it says within 3 days, and if we don't, you can get your deposit back. Then you see your rent amount listed here. It has our address to send the rent, although you'll probably be paying online. If you're moving in the middle of a month, you'll see a prorated rent amount listed here. And you'll notice if you're taking possession after the 20th of the month, then you have to pay the rent for this month, the prorated rent for this month, and next month's rent also. Where we generally accept online payments, but there is a transaction or convenience fee sometimes associated with that, so you might have to pay that. Just depends on what form of payment you're using. For some of you, you'll see, or actually for everybody, there's a lease administrative fee. It's blank here, but normally it will be, there'll be an amount listed here. As of the recording of this video, it's $13, but that could change by the time you're watching this, so just check to see what's in your lease. If you're renting a property with a septic system, you'll see $15 septic rent here, but this property doesn't have it, so it's blank. If you have a credit score of less than 650, then you will see in here it will say does have a lower credit score, and it'll have an amount listed here that you pay monthly for a credit contingency fee. Basically, this allows us to rent to tenants who have less than perfect credit rather than just denying those tenants like many management companies do. So we try to rent to more people, but we do charge extra for that, and this is where you would see that in your lease. Make sure this is the same as what you were notified when you were approved for your application. Keyless smart locks. If you're renting a property that has a keyless lock, which is basically a touchpad lock, then you'll have the option to be able to use your phone to unlock that, and there's a charge of $2 per month for that. If you don't want that and just want to use the 4-digit code, you can do that also. Payments are applied towards the oldest charges first, not towards the current month's rent. So if you make a payment this month and you still owe money from last month for a late fee or something like that, then it gets applied to that first. So it's important to remember that to make sure you pay your full balance. Your rent is late if it hasn't been paid by the 2nd day of the month. We're not required to accept it after the 5th day. And if you are late, your late fee is listed in this section here. It's 10% of the rent, which in this case is $360. Also, there's a $75 fee for any return check, and if you're so late that we have to send you a notice, which would be, basically you have to be, I believe, 3 days late, then we will have to send you a notice to pay rent or quit, and then there's an additional $25 fee for that. If you ask us to actually come to the property and pick up payment, or we have to go out there because you haven't paid in order to collect the money, there's a $50 charge for us to do that. If we have to file an eviction against you, hopefully not, but if we do, then there's a fee for that to cover the court costs and attorney's fees. You'll see that listed here. The security deposit is listed in this section. It's blank on this one, but your lease will have a security deposit listed. It will say what bank it's held in and the amount of the deposit, and you should have already paid this by the time you get your lease. This is mostly some legal language that just goes over how security deposits work in Georgia. Basically, the deposit stays in an escrow account until you move out of the property. When you move out, We do a move-out inspection to compare the condition of the property to how it was when you moved in. If there's any damage beyond normal wear and tear, you'll get charged for that and receive a statement showing you what you were charged for. And it will be deducted from your deposit, and then the remaining deposit would be sent to you within 30 days of move-out. So that's how it works in Georgia. The process is similar in Florida. In Florida, there's not quite as many timeline restrictions. It's basically just the deposit, if it's being returned, has to be returned within 30 days. Georgia has some more deadlines for inspections, so those are only the real differences between the two states. There is a fee for $150 to rekey the locks if you don't turn in your keys. If there are any repairs that have to be charged to you on move-out, then there's a $100 fee for basically to coordinate the repairs on that. So that will also be deducted from your deposit. So make sure you keep the property in good shape. This just says a move-out statement will be sent to you. This language basically just says we hold the deposit in an escrow account. It doesn't get handed over to anybody else. It stays with us. If you fail to move into the property after you've paid your security deposit, then you forfeit your deposit. If we sell, or if the owner of the property sells the property while you're in the middle of your lease, then your security deposit is automatically returned to you. You're required to put the utilities in your name within 3 days of the start of the lease. Make sure you do that. If you don't, and we have to send you a bill, there's a $25 fee for each utility bill. So if you have water, power, and gas, then you could get charged $75 just for us having to send you those bills, and then you'll still end up having to pay those bills. So you want to make sure you get those switched over into your name within 3 days of starting your lease. Of course, we'll do a move-in inspection when you move in. There is a video waiver here that basically says you agree to allow us to do a video inspection rather than a written one. We don't always do that, but it is in the lease in case we do. Tenant's responsibilities. Basically, this says that you're required to take good care of the property. You're required to let us know if something is broken and needs to be fixed. Small repairs, basically things like light bulbs, furnace filters, batteries in the smoke detector, those are your responsibility to fix. So that's why this says if it's less than $75, that's your responsibility. But like I said, that's generally only really small items. This section of the lease will say who's responsible for taking care of the lawn. For most leases, this will be the tenant, that'd be you, but it could be the owner in some properties like townhouses. So you want to look here and see, it'll say right here either landlord or tenant. So look there to see who's responsible. If there's a drain, pipe, or septic system that gets clogged up, it's your responsibility to fix that. So make sure you don't put anything down the drains that shouldn't be there. Pest control is generally a landlord responsibility when it's termites or rodents. For anything else, it's a tenant responsibility. So you want to make sure that you get pest control treatments, or you do them yourself, to make sure roaches, spiders, and other things aren't in the property. The only thing the landlord is generally responsible for is termites and rodents. And you can always look here to see if there's something different for your specific property, but this is the standard. You're required to replace the smoke detector batteries and check them every 30 days. You're responsible for making sure the pipes don't freeze over. We try to send out reminders on this if it's going to be cold, but it's always your responsibility. If there's any mold or mildew in the house, be sure you call us or submit a service request to let us know so we can have it looked into. If you put any locks or access codes on gates or security systems, you're required to give us access to that right away. You're required to have the carpets cleaned once a year and just prior to move out. You'll have to provide us a copy of the receipt on that when you move out. So make sure you do that, otherwise you'll get charged for a carpet cleaning when you move out. So be sure to get those carpets cleaned. We have furnace filters delivered to your house approximately every 90 days. This is part of the lease admin fee that you pay every month. So these get delivered right to your house. They have our logo on them. So all you have to do is put the filter into the furnace and you're good to go. If you don't replace that filter, they have a date stamp on them. So when we go out to the property and inspect it, we can see whether you've put an up-to-date filter in or not. So it's important for you to replace those, because if you don't, then you'll be responsible for liquidated damages of $250 when we find that that filter hasn't been replaced like it was supposed to be. So remember to take care of that. And this is because if the filter isn't replaced, it causes damage to the air conditioning system or the furnace. So it's very important that you replace those filters. That's why we get them sent out to you on a regular basis. Repairs for refrigerators, washers, and dryers are your responsibility. If those appliances are left in the house, they're left there as a courtesy, so they're still your responsibility to get fixed. If you want access to neighborhood amenities like the pool, if your neighborhood has one, then you'll be responsible for paying the HOA fees for that neighborhood. Make sure to always keep your pets on a leash. Basically, you're responsible if you set anything on fire. So make sure to be careful if you're using a wood-burning stove, a fire pit, or anything like that. And you can't light a fire anywhere outside of places that are specifically designed for that. If the property is built prior to 1978, then we'll provide you a copy of the EPA's brochure. Basically, we're just required to let you know the property built before 1978 may have lead paint on the walls or the windows, or it could be anywhere on the property. So if we are aware of any lead paint, then the notice we give you will say that. Generally, we're not aware of any lead-based paint, but if there was an exception to that, we would let you know about it, and we'll provide you this brochure. So if the property you're renting was built prior to 1978, look for that extra form on there also. This will say whether we're aware of any flooding history on the property. You are not allowed to sublet the property. Then the person named on the lease, you, is the person that we expect to be occupying it. There can't be anybody else who leases the property from you. It's only for residential use of you and your immediate family. You shouldn't be conducting a business or renting it out to anyone else or doing anything else out of the property. It's for residential use. Do not be a nuisance to your neighbors or do anything unlawful in the property. Always follow all the rules. You are responsible for making sure that your property, your personal property, is insured. So you have to have renter's insurance to cover your belongings, and also to obtain liability insurance of $100,000 minimum. So you have to provide this before you move in, which is what this talks about here. You're required to provide us a copy of your insurance, and you also have to make sure it stays up to date. It can't lapse. If at any point it lapses, then you'll have to pay us $25 per month when we don't have proof of your insurance. And this is basically to incentivize you to keep the property covered with insurance, to keep your belongings covered, and also to provide us funds in case something were to happen and it's not covered. So the point here is this is more expensive than tenant's insurance. So it's much better for you to just get the renter's insurance. It'll cost less to you than this will, and it'll make sure that all your belongings are covered and the property is covered. Of course, if you don't get the property covered and we find out about it, then we won't renew your lease. So make sure you get that taken care of. With 24 hours notice, we have access to the property Monday through Saturday from 9 to 8 to do inspections, repairs, maintain the property, or to show it to prospective buyers or tenants. During the last 60 days, we put a for rent or for sale sign out on the property, and we put a lockbox on the property. So that happens during the last 60 days. Usually we don't do it till about the last 30 or 45 days, but up to 60 days. Every time you deny access to us to get access to the property, there's a $50 liquidated damages charge for that. So it's important that you cooperate with those inspections, showings, and everything else. About 3 months before your lease expires every year, our third-party inspection provider, right now it's On-Site Pros, but it could be someone else. It's a professional company we hire to inspect the property. Will contact you to come out and do an inspection for us. They take lots of pictures. They basically just take a look to see if the property's in the proper condition. They check the furnace filters, the batteries in the smoke detector, all that kind of stuff. You're required to cooperate with that. We won't renew your lease if you don't cooperate with that inspection. So there's also damages if you do not cooperate with that of $150. So, it's important to cooperate with that inspection. It's not intrusive. The inspector is careful not to disturb any of your belongings or anything, but we do have to see the property at least once a year in order to see what the condition is. Do not change the locks on the property. If for some reason you do, for an emergency or something like that, you have to immediately provide us with copies of the keys. Of course, don't leave expired vehicle tags on your cars. Don't keep combustible materials or anything that's a fire risk in the property. Do not put nails or hooks or anything like that in the walls. If you do, you have to make sure that you patch and repaint those walls before you move out. Otherwise, you'll be charged for the damage. So, they do make hooks that you can put on the wall that don't have to go into the wall. They just attach to the surface. You can get those at Home Depot and Lowe's. So check into those for hanging pictures. Don't improperly dispose of motor oil, paint, or anything else. There's no water beds allowed. No space heaters or window air conditioning units unless you have written approval from us. Do not remove any of the blinds or other window treatments. You have to follow all posted rules. That includes any rules that the HOA provides. No skateboarding, rollerblading, or bicycling on the property without proper safety equipment. If you want to put a satellite dish on the property or have cable installed and they need to drill holes or anything like that, you need to get approval from us first. So make sure you contact us. We do have a concierge utility company that you should have received an email with their contact information, and they'll be contacting you automatically also to help you set up cable or satellite TV. And if you go through them, they will make sure that the satellite dish is put on an approved location. So make sure you go through them. That makes it really easy. Don't make any changes or repairs to the property without our prior approval. You're required to keep the utilities on at all times while you're in the property. If you don't, there'll be a $150 charge for us to get them reconnected when you move out. Smoking is completely prohibited on the property, no exceptions. If you're in a location where medical marijuana or recreational marijuana is approved, that goes for marijuana smoke also. This is all smoke, so no smoking on the premise or in the property at any time. Pets have to be approved by us in advance. If you're found to have a non-approved pet, then you'll have to basically pay back pet fees to the beginning of your occupancy of the property. So you're not going to be saving any money by trying to hide a pet from us, because we will find out about it. We do inspections. So if you have a pet, let us know about it. And we will, of course, have to screen the pet. But, we do not deny pets. We allow pets in all of our properties. You just have to get them properly screened and pay your pet admin fees, and it shouldn't be a problem. Of course, if you do have any approved pets, then they will be listed here. And the admin fee for move-in, and then the monthly admin fee will be listed here. Default talks about what happens if you don't abide by the rules in the lease, including paying your rent. Basically, we'll give you a 3-day notice telling you that you have to pay or leave the property, and if you don't, we will have to file eviction. We're very strict on our deadlines on this. Rent is due on the 1st. It's late if it hasn't been paid on the 2nd. We send a notice to pay rent or quit on the 4th, and then we're filing evictions on the 8th. So it's very important that you pay your rent on time and follow all rules so you don't have to deal with any of these things here dealing with default. Of course, this is the part that talks about the fee that we charge of $25 if we have to send you a notice that you have not paid your rent or you violated a rule or anything else. Anytime you've done something that's not allowed by the lease and we send you a written notice, there's a $25 fee for that. If the property is damaged or destroyed, this is the section that deals with that. We won't go through it because it's pretty unusual. This is some standard legal language just dealing with disclaimers about representations that we provide and other things of that effect. You can read through this, but there's not really anything here that will apply For most of you, basically just some legal language talking about you need to basically read the contract yourself, not depend upon on us to provide you information. You should inspect the property. All those sorts of things is what this is talking about when it gives this disclaimer. Same thing under neighborhood conditions. Basically, you agree that you've inspected the neighborhood. You aren't relying upon us to tell you whether the neighborhood is safe or anything to that effect. So basically what all this says is you're responsible for doing your due diligence, and you're not depending upon us to do that for you. Time is of the essence. In other words, sign this lease as quickly as possible after you've read it completely. There's no waivers. We enforce all of the contract at all times. This just goes through the definitions of words like landlord and tenant. Joint and several obligations means if there is more than one tenant named on your lease, for example, if there's roommates, if there's two of you, then you're both responsible for all of the lease. And if we're dealing with one of you, it's the same as if we're dealing with both of you. So if one of you provides notice to vacate, then that's basically saying that both of you are going to vacate. If that's not the case, you need to let us know. Generally, what this means is you are treated legally as one entity if there's more than one of you named on the lease. So if you don't pay the rent, then both of you are responsible for the fact that you didn't pay the rent. Both of you will be named on the dispossessory, the eviction. Both of you will have the debt on your record, and so on and so forth. So it's important that you make sure that all parties on the lease, all roommates, whoever it may be, everybody follows all the rules. This says that this is the entire agreement. There's no verbal agreements. Attorney's fees and court costs just says if we have to go to court for some reason to evict you or anything else, that you're responsible for the cost of doing that. Indemnification just means that you don't hold us responsible legally for any injuries or anything you have on the property, that you're responsible for those sorts of things, and you hold us harmless. All notices have to be in writing. Again, nothing is done verbally. Basically, this just says you notify us rather than the actual landlord of the property. So when you're renting through a property management company, we basically act as your landlord, even though we don't own the property. So you always give your notices to us and not to the landlord directly. This just says basically we want written notices, so you can do overnight delivery, a fax, a registered mail, email, basically just anything in writing. Notice is deemed received when it is actually received, not when you send it. And that's the same with rent, by the way. What matters is when we get it, not when you've sent it. This just talks about sending anything by fax or email. Basically, when you send it to a member of our company, that's the same as if we receive it. This is just talking about signatures on fax documents, which you'll be doing an electronic signature. So basically, this says that your electronic signature is just as binding as a written signature with a pen. This just lists the appliances that are in the property. This talks about us giving you copies of keys, and it also says that we can give keys to vendors and anyone else who needs to access the property to keep it in good repair. You waive homestead rights, which is basically just a tax issue. Georgia is the governing law for this lease. Of course, if you're renting a Florida property from us, it would be Florida law that would apply. This just again says that you're responsible for looking into the crime records in the neighborhood, and you don't hold us or the landlord responsible if there's any crime. This is referring to your rental application and basically says that you are certifying that everything you provided on that application is true and correct. You waive a jury trial if there are any sort of disputes. Landlord verification is when you finally move out of the property, hopefully many years down the line. You're giving us authorization to release information to any future landlords who call us and request it. So if you use us as a reference and the landlord calls us, you're giving us the authority to tell them all the information we have about your period in the house, and you also agree to pay us $25 for providing that information to that broker, and we can deposit or deduct that from your security deposit if we need to. If you need to terminate your lease early, this is the section that talks about that. Basically, you have to provide 2 months notice. You have to pay all the amounts due through the end of that notice period. You forfeit your security deposit. You have to pay 2 months' rent as liquidated damages, return the property in clean and ready condition, pay a $250 admin fee, and you have to pay all this up front. So you can't give notice and then expect to pay at the end when you move out. The notice isn't valid until you've actually provided the liquidated damages and the admin fee. You can still pay your normal rent when it's due, but the admin fee and the liquidated damages of 2 months' rent have to be paid when you give notice. And we will not provide any landlord references to anyone until you have actually paid this. So if you haven't paid the amounts due and we get a call from another landlord in the middle of your lease with us and they're asking for a reference, we will tell them that your lease is still valid and we can't provide you a reference. So you have to get this taken care of up front. Of course, we obey the law for active duty military. If you get transferred, then you're entitled to certain rights to terminate the lease. I won't go into those in detail because they're different for Florida and Georgia because Florida has their own set of laws. So basically just understand that we agree to comply with whatever the law is as far as terminating the lease early for active duty military. If you hold over in the property after the end of your lease without our permission, then you're charged 10% of the monthly rent per day that you do that. And of course, we'll also have to file eviction. So it's important that you vacate the property when you're supposed to. Abandonment basically just says how we determine if you have abandoned the property. If the landlord needs to terminate your lease, then of course you have certain rights. He has to give you 2 full calendar months notice. You still owe the rent during that notice period, of course, but then when you move out, the landlord is required to pay you 2 months' rent as compensation for terminating your lease early. So you have rights just like the landlord has rights when it comes to early termination, and they're basically equal. At the end of your lease, we will, assuming we haven't given you notice to terminate or you haven't given us notice to terminate, then we will send you a lease renewal. If you don't sign your lease renewal, then your lease will automatically continue on a month-to-month basis, but there will be a 15% rent increase while that's in effect. And there's also a $25 per month lease, month-to-month lease admin fee, so it's important to get your lease renewal signed. If you decide to cancel a notice to vacate, there's a $250 fee for that, so make sure you don't give notice to vacate unless you're actually intending to leave. This says that we will send you your lease renewal about by the 20th day of the month and the month prior to it renewing. We usually send it a little bit earlier than that, but that's the latest. If you sign it that month, there's no extra fee for the lease renewal. If you sign it between the 1st and the 15th of the month that it's going to expire in, then there's a $25 lease renewal fee. And if you sign it between the 16th and the end of the month, there's a $100 fee. If you let it expire and then you want to sign a renewal after that, there's a $250 fee. So the short description here is that it's important to sign your lease renewal as quickly as possible. If you request that we send you a paper lease, we generally don't do that. We try to do everything electronically. So if you ask us to do this, there's a $25 paper lease preparation and postage fee. Agency disclosures, basically what this just means is we represent the landlord. We are not representing you. What we're doing is representing the interest of the owner of the property. So it's important to understand that we can't give you legal advice. We can't do anything like that. If you have questions about the lease, we can answer factual questions for you, but if you're looking for advice, you need to seek that from an attorney or from a real estate agent that represents you because we have to represent the landlord. That's our requirement with our client. This just says that we're representing the client, the owner of the property as a brokerage, and he's paying us a fee to do that. We have a separate contract with him to do those services. Communication directly with the landlord is prohibited by your lease. So if you are going to be late on your rent and you don't like the fact that we're charging you a late fee, you can't just call the landlord if you find his contact information somehow. If you do that, there's a fee of $50 every single time you try to do that. Even if he doesn't answer the phone, if you just try to call him, there's a fee. So it's important, you have to remember, always communicate with us. The landlord pays us to manage the property because he doesn't want to receive those phone calls or other contact attempts. So make sure you always go through us. If there's any special stipulations, anything unusual for your property, or for your lease, then that will be listed in this section here. For example, this one says the person who owns the property is a real estate licensee. And finally, there'll be the signature page where you'll just sign in here. We'll sign down in this area. This just has our brokerage information. This is very similar on the Florida lease. Looks a little bit different, but it's basically the same. Again, if you have a property that you're renting that's built before 1978, you'll also have another page that is for the lead paint disclosure. You'll just have a couple places to initial and sign on there, and you'll also receive a lead paint brochure. If you're renting from us in Florida, you'll also receive a copy of the Georgia Landlord-Tenant Act. That'll be attached to your email along with the lease. Florida law just requires that you receive a copy of that. So basically just get this back to us as quickly as possible. If you have any questions, email us at support@gtlrealestate.com.